Okay, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. I know some people are still filing in, but the first part is just kind of logistics anyway, so won't really miss anything. We are going to ask you that during the presentation, I know you guys are going to have a lot of questions. To help us sort through them, because we have a big crowd, I'm going to ask that if you have content questions about Zoom, questions for Tyler about how to use it, that you post those questions using the Q&A function. And if you have technical questions, or in this workshop, we're going to be talking about interactivity. So we're going to be asking you to respond to some questions in the chat. You can respond to the questions on the slides in the chat, or if you have technical difficulties, your video cut out or something like that, post that in the chat room, and we will try to address those as quickly as possible. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. I'd just like to thank you guys for coming. This is actually the third webinar like this that we have been able to offer. Distance learning, ideas from the field. Today, we're going to be talking about using Zoom for adult literacy distance learning. And we're going to have Tyler Morrone from Zoom, who's going to show us some of the features of Zoom that you can use to make your distance learning a little more interactive. And we had a lot of questions. A lot of people we know, a lot of our folks are using Zoom. We had a lot of questions about the functionality of it during the first webinar. And so Tyler very graciously was volunteered to come and show you guys how to use it and maybe how to be more effective. For the record, we are recording this webinar. We'll have a follow-up email on Monday, which will have a link to the recording. Any websites that get mentioned during the webinar, we try to include those in the resources that we send out in the follow-up email. We'll have certificates. We're starting to offer certificates for these webinars now, so we'll have a link to those as well. But you'll get a follow-up email on Monday, and that's for folks who are attending, as well as for folks who just registered. So if you know somebody else and they didn't get a chance to attend, they'll get a link to the recording as well. They won't get a certificate. Again, here's what I said about asking questions and just remembering to put your content questions in the Q&A and your technical issues in chat. And Tyler, we're going to try to get to everybody's questions. Tyler has a little bit of time after the webinar is over, so we're going to try to get as many questions as we can answered. And if we're unable to get to things, then Tyler has agreed that we can email him the remaining questions and he'll give us written responses like that. Let's see. Next, we are offering these webinars weekly. You can look in your email for an invitation for the next one each Tuesday or Wednesday. We try to get them out Tuesday or Wednesday. It sometimes depends on other emails we have going out. Here's kind of our upcoming schedule, hearing from Ozark Literacy Council, Northside Independent School District in San Antonio, and Community Action of Central Texas. And let me just say thank you for those of you who have reached out to me and said you would be willing to present. I am trying to set up appointments to talk to everybody, find out what you're doing, and fit you in the schedule. And it's just really wonderful to see how willing people are to share what they've been doing. The recordings are posted on Education Network. Here's the link to get to ProLiteracy Education Network, ProLiteracyEdNet.org. If you don't already have an account, you can go there, learn more about it, create an account. The recordings are posted in the Distance Learning Resources section. It's very easy to find. When you log in, you'll see a big banner across the top of the welcome page. You click on that banner, takes you right there. And if you have any questions, you can email me there. And so before I turn things over to Tyler, I was just going to do a little bit of an interactive activity. So just to kind of show you a little bit about how to kind of make your instruction interactive. So what I'm going to ask you to do is, here is the word said. I'm going to ask you to write the present tense of the word said. I'm going to ask you to write it in the chat. I'm going to ask you to send your response just to the panelists, not to the panelists and attendees, just to the panelists, so that not all the students can see your answer. Oh, and people jumped in and sent it to, oh, perfect. Perfect, perfect, perfect. Everybody got that right. Okay, let's do another one. Present tense of went. And again, just send it to the panelists. Oh, what an excellent group of students you are. Perfect, great responses. Great responses. So just a little bit about this, just kind of thinking about what we just did, is when you're designing interactive activities for students and you want them to respond to questions that you're posing, it's really helpful to put the question or the activity on a slide so they can read it, be clear about what you're asking them to do. And then you want to limit it to really one question per slide. So don't overload them with information, one question per slide. It may wind up that you have a slide deck of a couple of hundred slides. That's okay, but it'll be a lot easier for your students to follow. And with that, I'm going to turn things over to Tyler.
Thanks so much, Todd. Welcome, everybody. Great to have everyone here. I see a large list, probably one of the biggest trainings I've done in recent memory for sure, which is great to see. Now, I'm going to be covering a lot of different things in today's session. Multiple things from scheduling to adjusting some of your settings, you know, and then in-meeting controls, how to do breakout rooms, how to do polling, lots of different things that we'll be talking about here in today's session. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen right now. Make sure that you're kind of clicked into our Zoom meeting so you can see everything that we've got going on with this content. And I'll make sure that I point out all the most important pieces of today's session as we go. First things first, for those of you with Zoom accounts, I'd like to start by talking about how to log in properly through Zoom's website. There's kind of multiple facets to Zoom, and the first one is the web portal here. This is the back end of Zoom. So this is where you can adjust your profile picture, your settings, you know, find any of your recordings. If you already have a Zoom account, you'll click the sign in button. If you go to zoom.us, it's up here at the top right-hand corner. Put in your email address and password. For those of you that might be new to Zoom and you might have to sign up on your own maybe, the sign up, it's free button is up at the top right. And now I already saw a few questions in the chat about what's in the Q&A about what's the difference between paid licenses and the free version. There's a couple main differences. The free version of Zoom, a basic license, is not able to use cloud recording. They can't use polling. And then if you are the host and you are a basic user and you're doing a group meeting, that meeting will time out at 40 minutes. Those are the big ones for basic users and what they're more limited to. The paid version of Zoom will have all of those features included. Now, once you have signed in with that email address and password, the profile tab is one of the first things you should see. One thing I always recommend, and actually I realized I haven't uploaded mine here today. I got to go find myself a new profile picture. That's what pops up on the screen in your Zoom meetings when you are not on video, but you want people to still see what you look like. I would always recommend uploading a profile picture for that. Lately, a lot of people have been doing it with their kids, their dog, you know, whatever profile picture you end up wanting to upload. The other important thing I do want to touch on here is this personal meeting ID. We call it a PMI for short. Now, this is an always available virtual Zoom office for yourself, basically. My recommendation with this personal meeting ID or PMI, only use it for instant meetings with your colleagues. Now, the reason for that, this personal meeting ID, it doesn't change. It's a static meeting ID. For those of you, you know, that are potentially thinking about using this, I would encourage not to use it for scheduled meetings. And think about it this way. If I have 5 completely separate sessions in one day in Zoom that I am the host of, and I have different groups of people that are coming to each session, I don't want to use this personal meeting ID, because what happens if people from group B mix up the time on their calendar and they hop in an hour too early? What if they're hopping into a meeting that you don't want them to be a part of? So my encouragement is to schedule all of your Zoom meetings, whether you do it here through Zoom's web portal, or my best recommendation, which I'll talk about in a few minutes, which is scheduling from your Google Calendar. That will generate a unique 11-digit meeting ID for every meeting. So back to this little use case I mentioned of you've got 5 different sessions in a day. If you're scheduling properly, each one should have a completely different meeting ID, and that makes it really easy to separate out who's you're inviting to each one. As far as a couple other settings go, you have things like host and participant video. And if you have those settings defaulted to off, that means in your meetings, people come in with video off, including you, but they can turn it on anytime that they want to. Join before host is another functionality that a lot of people enjoy on our meetings platform, especially if you're someone that's meeting with someone that's new to Zoom. So to be honest, when I met with my parents over Zoom for the first time, when this whole coronavirus situation started unfolding and I didn't get to see them in person as much, I had to have join before host turned on, because they joined at least 5 minutes before I did to make sure they knew what they were doing with Zoom, could connect to audio properly. And that way, once I join, I'm not waiting for them to figure out the connection point. Polling is another great feature that you have here, especially for distance learning. 3 of the big ones for me is polling, annotation, and whiteboard, all in this section. Annotation and whiteboard is available for anybody with a Zoom account, basic or paid version. Polling is one of the ones that, as I mentioned earlier, you do need a paid account to do the polling side of things. I'm going to demonstrate how to set up polls, by the way, in a little bit here as well. The scheduling of a Zoom meeting. I would really recommend for those of you that are Google Calendar users to use our extension for your browser, because it's going to make things a little easier for you when you schedule meetings. If you'd like to find that extension, you can go to Zoom's downloads page at zoom.us/download. If you don't remember that link, no big deal. Just go to your browser and type in Zoom download, and it's going to be the first link that you'll click on at the top will be our page. And what you're looking for is the Zoom extension for your Chrome or Firefox browser, if you're a Google Calendar user. What that allows you to do is schedule meetings with just a few clicks. So how this is going to look in practice. Let's say I download this for Google Chrome. I'm going to now have a little Zoom icon at the top of my browser near the address bar where you type in the URL for a website. You'll need to sign into that with your email address and password. But basically, you're now linking your Zoom account to your Google Calendar so that you can very easily schedule your meetings. One thing I would always recommend before you start using this is to click the settings icon that's at the top right here when you've signed in. Because what that will do is show you some of these settings. Hopefully it looks a little familiar, the host and participant video, enabling the join before host feature. So anything that you change here, you're just changing that for one meeting. So perfect example, when I'm meeting with my parents, I'm definitely going to enable join before host and not have waiting room on because I want them to be able to connect ahead of time. But if I'm meeting with customers, clients, people that are relatively familiar with Zoom and I want to enable waiting room, I might do that for individual meetings with those people. So these settings are configurable for every meeting that you schedule. And if you'd like to make sure that you're getting these options every time you schedule from your calendar, you can check off the option to allow you to specify these each time. Now, what this looks like in practice, there's 2 ways. You can hit the schedule a meeting button and it generates an invitation so that all you need to do is change the title and add guests. My encouragement actually, and the way I see people do it easier, let's say you're already in your calendar. You go to May 30th and you open up an appointment. You see it here and you click more options and it opens the invitation. Now, at this point, Zoom isn't currently involved. All you would need to do is click Make It a Zoom Meeting. It schedules a Zoom meeting for you based on all of these settings. So as I mentioned earlier, I would really recommend using the one-time uniquely generated meeting ID. Select any of the settings that you might like and hit Continue, and it automatically generates your invitation. One question I get here all the time is, okay, Tyler, so you've talked about that Zoom generates a unique meeting ID for us. What happens if it's a recurring meeting? So maybe I set this to, it repeats every Tuesday at 4. How does Zoom handle that? And the good news here is because we're now integrated with your calendar, if you set this as a recurring meeting for any level of recurrence, we will keep this entire meeting invitation, the meeting ID, and that link valid for every single one of those occurrences. Nothing necessarily that you need to make sure you do Zoom-wise, just make sure you set it up as recurring within your calendar. I'm gonna change gears for just a second here, and I'm actually going to talk about setting up polling. So let me go ahead and open my web portal here for Zoom. So this is my Zoom account here in the web portal. Now, if you've scheduled a Zoom meeting, whether you schedule it in the web portal by clicking the Schedule a Meeting button up here, or whether you have scheduled it in your calendar and you just want to add polls to that already scheduled meeting, you can do so from the Meetings tab by clicking into that meeting. So I actually set this one up beforehand for today, called the topic Polling Test. If I'd like to add polls ahead of time, I just scroll all the way to the bottom here, and you see that poll option telling me I haven't created one. If I'd like to create a poll, I hit the Add button on the right. Now, really important thing here, you can add up to 25 different polls, and you can have up to 10 questions per poll. So in theory, if you wanted to, you could have 250 polling questions in one meeting. Hopefully that's plenty for you. I haven't seen anyone do more than about 30 or 40 before. But the way that this works is you enter a title for the poll, type your question, and the answer here. Now let's say you wanted to add a follow-up to that because they're all related topic-wise, and maybe one more follow-up to that as well. I have now saved this poll. This is poll number 1 for me, and it has 3 total questions. So if I wanted to add a second poll, I just hit add, and this is poll number 2, but maybe this one only has 1 question with answers in it. You can, again, do up to 25 of these different ones with 10 questions per. And then once that webinar or meeting is live, you can then launch those polls. Speaking of launching polls, I know Todd has actually set up a few polls in here for us for today's session. If everybody wouldn't mind responding to these polls as Todd launches them right now. I know we got a question, can you do an example poll? This is that time.
Sure, and so I've actually created 2 polls. So this is the first one. It's on vocabulary words, and it's about opposites. So I'm just gonna ask you guys to answer both questions. And Tyler, they can't see this, so I'm going to describe what I'm seeing. So it tells me in a little panel on the polls how long the poll has been going on. It's 37 seconds at this point. It tells me how many people have responded to the question. So I've got 715 out of 926 people, and I get a running total of the responses, and people are basically responding with the correct answer. So good job. All right, we've been basically a minute. Most people have responded. I'm going to end that poll, and I can share the results. And so folks should be able to see the results there. And so great job. I'm going to stop sharing that poll. And then now I'm going to share another one, which is a fill in the blank question. So while they're answering that, Tyler, I'll just encourage people, you may have planned on talking about this, but I think it's really helpful for people if they're planning on using polls to get students engaged, to think about creating separate polls for different topics or different parts during your lesson to make it easier to kind of keep up with which polls you want to launch when. And then there's not a whole lot of kind of scrolling through and answering questions that students have to do. It's really easy for them to make sure they've answered everything and things like that. All right, I'm going to end that one as well. And folks did a great job with that one as well. I'll share the results. There you go. And now, because I did not make the poll anonymous, if I'm teaching, I can go back in and see who responded to what, and I can follow up if it's something that I think people may need some additional instruction in.
Yep, and I know we got a question in the chat on this about how do you share those results and what does that look like? It's what Todd just did now. As soon as you end that poll as the host, you are able to share the results with everybody, and that tells you the percentage of people that answered each question.
And it's just a little blue button on the bottom of the window that popped up when I clicked on the poll icon in my toolbar at the bottom. So it's very easy to find. It's very easy to follow. Blue button that says share, start polling or launch polling. Blue button that says stop polling. Blue button that says share results. Blue button that says stop sharing results.
Yep. Question I'm seeing in the chat and the Q&A is a couple things on polling before I move on here. So number one is, you know, can I create a poll on the fly? You definitely can, as long as you are the host. So that exact process that I demoed a couple minutes ago of setting up a poll beforehand, if you're in a meeting and you forgot to do it ahead of time, you can set a poll up on the fly by clicking the edit button in that meeting to add a new poll. And the other question I saw a couple times was, how do we find out who answered what for each poll? So let's say you launch the poll and you want to track what the students answered with. That can't be done during the meeting or webinar, but it can be done afterwards. In Zoom's web portal, so that place we were just at a few minutes ago, there is a reports tab that you will have, and there's a polling report for every single meeting or webinar that you do. Really quick thing to highlight, because I'm sure I'll get this question, is what's the difference between meeting and webinar? So right now, all of you are in a webinar with us, which means you're in listen and view only mode. So my best recommendation as to what to use when, if you do have access to the webinar platform for us, it is a paid add-on. Meetings are more collaborative. You want to see people on video. You want to hear verbally from each different person if they have any feedback during that meeting. It's great for smaller classroom style sessions. For something large like this, where we have hundreds of attendees, webinar is typically a better format. I always like to say, think of it like you're in a 500-person auditorium at a large college campus. For those general ed classes. That's normally where webinar fits into play, because you as the host and presenter want to be able to communicate all the information and not necessarily have people audibly interrupting you, but still give them the chance to ask Q&A questions, just like all of you are doing today. Now, I do want to highlight these things and move forward here on the desktop application. This is the engine that makes Zoom run. If you don't have Zoom's desktop application, and we're not going to be able to know who you are when you try to host your meetings. So for example, if I'm the host of a meeting for today at 3 p.m. and I'm not logged into my application, I can still join that meeting, but I won't be able to claim host controls, which means I can't record that meeting. Kind of comes back to a question I've seen in the chat and Q&A of, do people have to download Zoom to be able to join the meeting? And the answer is no. We have a web browser version of Zoom. I always recommend downloading the application either on desktop or mobile, but definitely there is that ability to not have to download. Once you've downloaded our application from our downloads page and you try to sign in, this is exactly what it will look like. For those of you that have Google Calendar, this sign in with Google is probably an easy option, but most of you will go the route of putting in that email address and password that you used the first time you signed up. As far as what the interface looks like, once you have signed in, this is what you'll see. The orange button here that says New Meeting starts an instant meeting using the Personal Meeting ID, or the PMI. So that's a great route to take if you just want to spin up an instant Zoom meeting to maybe chat quickly with a colleague instead of scheduling something. If you know the meeting ID of the session you'd like to join, but maybe you accidentally deleted the link in the invite, you can hit this join button and manually put in that meeting ID and then password if the meeting is password protected. The two more important things here at the top right. There is a presence icon, and if you have uploaded a profile picture, that's what would show. If you don't have one, it would just be your initials. This allows you to see your presence in Zoom, so whether you're available and not in the meeting. A red camera icon appears if you're in a meeting or a webinar, or you can change your presence here to Do Not Disturb. This one's great if you do have a lot of other contacts, so maybe you're a part of a school or a university's account. You can see your other fellow faculty members and what their presence is on Zoom. The other one here is the settings icon. I know it's a little small here, but it's very, very important. These are the settings for how Zoom operates on your computer. So all of these here, from general to video, audio, all the way down, these are unique to you. So any changes you make to these settings, this just changes how Zoom happens on your screen. So if you're an instructor and you really love using dual monitors and maybe you have a couple different ones, I always recommend that. Dual monitors enables you, when content is being shared, for content to be on one window and another full screen of Zoom on your other monitor, that you can see video feeds of everybody so that it's not maybe in a smaller thumbnail. For those of you that might be on video, I always recommend that as much as possible. It's a way to be a little more personal with people. And I always find that some of my meetings kind of resonate a lot more if I can have more people on video. You've even got that ability to use the touch up my appearance feature. I can tell you, if you've got kids and they force you to only have about 2 hours of sleep, that feature definitely helps. When I get no sleep, I throw that one on every time. And then you've got audio. I've seen a couple questions in the chat and Q&A here about connecting from audio. You know, can people connect from their cell phone? Will that still work? So there's a couple different ways to connect to a Zoom meeting for audio. Computer audio is what I always recommend, which uses your internet connection, and you can use a mic and speaker that's built into your device or a headset. For those of you that more commonly join by mobile, so an iPad, an iPhone, an Android tablet, anything like that, selecting the computer audio in that sense is using the internet audio if you're connected to Wi-Fi or cellular data. If you're using an iPad or a phone to connect with the Zoom mobile application. And then the other way is calling in by phone. If you're calling into a Zoom meeting by phone, you're not going to see any content or anybody physically because you're just connecting to audio, but that's definitely another option as well for someone that maybe doesn't have internet connectivity and just wants to be an audible part of the meeting. The last one here is the share options. The one that sometimes people find that's automatically checked off that they'd like to disable actually is this first one, entering full screen when somebody shares. I personally have disabled this one as well. I'd like to be the one that chooses when I go full screen with any application. But in a nutshell, what I'm kind of getting at here is for any of these different categories, I would really encourage you to take a look at these settings and see what you would prefer, because all of this is completely unique to you. Now here's where we get into the important piece. Hosting a Zoom meeting and being an active part of one. As I mentioned earlier, and Todd did as well, this is a webinar, so all of you are in listen and view only mode, so you can see my content, hear me, you know, respond to those polls, ask questions in the Q&A, but not necessarily be an active and audible participant. What I'm going to go through here is the traditional route of Zoom, which is the meetings platform. Now, when you join a meeting, there's a couple options here for audio typically, computer audio, which uses your internet connection or dialing in by phone. If you dial the number, put in the meeting ID and then the password if there is one, that'll join you to that meeting from an audio perspective if you can't use computer. Now, once you've joined that meeting, these are going to be your controls. So I'm just going to kind of go left to right here. The ability to mute and unmute yourself with just one click and start and stop your video. All of those can be done as much as you need to throughout a meeting. Now, what happens if you've got a scenario where your headset is dying, or maybe your internet keeps cutting out and you want to switch to phone? You can hit this little up arrow that would be right next to the microphone button, and it allows you to change your microphone, change your speaker, or switch to phone audio entirely. If you've got multiple different audio sources, I would actually really recommend clicking the test speaker and microphone option here. I think that's going to be a really valuable one. That will roll through every different audio device that you have connected to your computer to see which one actually is the one producing sound for you. Same kind of thing with the video feature. If I wanted to switch cameras, I could definitely do so at any time. Now, one important thing to note is what happens if, let's say Todd is the host of a meeting for me and I deleted the invitation. He's waiting for me in that meeting and I email him and I say, Todd, man, I'm so sorry. I deleted the invitation. Can you send me the link again? In the meeting, he can hit the information button at the top left and he can hit copy URL and just send it over to me and I can click that link and get into the meeting. Now, bottom right-hand corner, this is the first important thing to note for the difference between a host and a participant in a Zoom meeting. The host has an end meeting button, which means you can end the meeting for absolutely everyone that's there. But what happens if you just want to leave the meeting and have everybody else be able to stay? If you're the host and you click end meeting, there's going to be three options. End the meeting, cancel the request, maybe you clicked it on accident, or leave meeting. When you click leave meeting, that normally means you would like the meeting to continue, but you can't stay. So what Zoom will do is ask you to choose who you'd like to pass host controls off to. You select that person, and then you're able to leave that meeting, even if you were the original host, and someone else can take it through the finish line. Now, there's two views in a Zoom meeting. First one you'll see here is called active speaker. Now this one shows the video feed of who is currently talking. So it'll switch if the active speaker switches. A lot of people like to use the gallery view though. Now this one, if no content is being shared in a meeting, gallery view is an option. So all of you wouldn't see this one right now. But gallery view kind of looks like a Brady Bunch view. You are able to see 5 by 5 or 25 people if there's that many in your meeting on this screen. Now, for those of you that have been using Zoom for a little while, you might recognize a new feature for us that has come out in the last couple of weeks, and that's this security button at the left-hand side here next to participants. What feedback we've been hearing is, we know you have a lot of security options to secure your meetings, but a lot of us that are new to hosting Zoom meetings, specifically in the education space, where you're going from having to host all your classes in person to switching your entire curriculum to virtual, which is extremely impressive and I can only imagine very difficult to do. Where can we find all those security features in one place? And that's where this security button comes into play. If you're the host and you click security, you can change what is allowed. You can allow participants to share their screen or not, allow them to chat or not, allow them to rename themselves. You can even lock the meeting. And one of my new favorites is the ability to enable waiting room. So with this new functionality, you're able to enable the waiting room feature right in the middle of a meeting. So for example, if I came into Todd's meeting and told him, hey Todd, I actually shared this meeting ID with my entire family. They should be hopping on pretty soon. And he kind of says, well, that's definitely not what I wanted. He can go into security and enable waiting room so he can then basically see everybody that's trying to join and decide if he'd like to admit them into the meeting or not. Speaking of meeting management as a host, your controls are much different than someone that would be a regular participant. So let's say you're running an online virtual class and you'd like to make sure you can manage everyone appropriately. As the host, you can click the Participants tab, and it will show you a list of everybody in the meeting. First, if you need to invite someone else to that meeting, you can click Invite, and a list of your contacts will pop up. So if you're a part of a company or a group account, right? Let's say maybe your university or school has a Zoom account. Everyone on your account should pop up as a contact for you by default. If you aren't, and maybe you have an individual account, the copy the URL button would be a great route to take as well. As the host, I can also mute or unmute everybody in a Zoom meeting. I can hit this More button, and I can do things like mute participants on entry, turning on or off that setting, turning on or off the entry and exit chime, or locking the meeting so nobody else can join. To be honest, what I normally see, though, is you'll probably face times where you're more going to be managing people individually. So let's kind of flip this around. I'll use Todd as my guinea pig. Let's say I was the host today and Todd was one of my panelists and in my meeting. And let's say that maybe he unmuted himself to add some context, but forgot to mute. He's at home, his dog starts barking, kids are yelling, and he doesn't realize that he's not muted. Not a problem. As the host, I can find him on my list and he'll be at the top if he's unmuted and producing sound, and I'll just be able to hover over his name and hit the mute button. Now, let's say I need to do more than that. Let's say Todd is intentionally being disruptive. He's like, man, this Tyler guy, he's pretty terrible at this training thing. I'm just gonna derail the rest of the session. And he starts blasting music in his speakers, turns on his video and starts dancing, and I'm over it, that's it for me. I can hit the More button next to his user and click Remove and boot him out. Zoom recognizes I did it for a reason and kind of acts like a virtual bouncer and will not let him back in. From an education perspective, I've actually seen this used a lot. I actually rolled my old high school out on Zoom about a month and a half ago or so, and you know, got some teachers emailing me saying, hey, you know, we have students that are coming in and, you know, we're telling them, make sure you're paying attention and not doing anything inappropriate. If you continue to disrupt the class, we will kick you out of it. Students think it's just a, you know, a threat to try to get them not to do it, but it's actually not. You can just kick them out of the meeting and they can't rejoin for the remainder of that one session. So let's say you've got a recurring weekly session with these classes. That's okay. They can join the ones following that. They're just restricted for the remainder of that one single meeting that they're disrupting. You can chat people within in-meeting chat here. If you're the host, you can ask someone to start their video if their video is off. So if you'd like everyone to be on video, you can request that, but the users themselves get to actually make that decision. I talked about making host earlier. If you need to leave a meeting and you'd like to make someone else the host, you can, or you can make someone a co-host. Now, co-host is a valuable feature as well for any of you that host large-scale sessions. So for me, I run trainings a lot like this. If it's in a meeting format, I normally like to have someone promoted to a co-host with me to help me manage participants. Just makes things a lot easier on me because then I have someone else that's able to mute and unmute people if they need to, if I'm focusing on the content. Now, in meeting chat, there's a lot of different options here. I know you're using the chat in a webinar. In a meeting, it's a little different. In a meeting, you would, in theory, have the ability to chat everybody individually and privately, but the host gets to make that choice. So let's say I'm an instructor and I'm in a meeting. I want people only be able to chat publicly so that students can't send private messages back and forth. Either I'd turn off private chat as a whole, or just switch it to participants can chat with everybody publicly so that you as the teacher or instructor will see every message that goes into that in-meeting chat. Now here's the big one, sharing content. So with Zoom, there is no passing of a ball or passing of host controls necessary to share content. In general, anybody can share content in a Zoom meeting. as long as someone else is not currently. Now, one thing that we've done from an education standpoint, this goes back to a question I saw earlier that probably there's multiple of similar ones here. What is Zoom doing for security from an education standpoint? So for a lot of brand new K through 12 schools that were getting ramped up on Zoom, we turned off the ability for participants to share content by default. For those of you that are on Zoom accounts, maybe you've been with Zoom for a while, for a university, or your school in general has done something like that. That's something that can be decided by your account administrators or by you. You're able to hit this little up arrow that's next to the share screen icon, and you can actually change how you want to restrict screen share. So you can restrict screen share to you as the host only can be the one to share, so that participants can't share even if you're not currently. A lot of times from an education standpoint, that is a functionality I would encourage. Again, it's this little up arrow right here if you'd like to make that adjustment. Now, once you hit the green share screen button, this box is going to pop up for you. On a Mac, you should see desktop 1, 2, 3 if you have multiple monitors. On a Windows machine, it should say screen. My encouragement, though, to be really honest, is not to share desktop. The reason for that, when you share desktop, what happens if you get an instant message or an email and it pops up at the right-hand corner? Not going to be ideal for you, right? You don't want people to see any of those pop-ups, so my recommendation is definitely to share individual applications whenever possible. If you've pulled up those applications ahead of time and you have them not minimized, but pulled up on your screen, and you hit share, you can choose between any of those applications. You can share a whiteboard. For iPhones and iPads, you can use AirPlay if your computer and phone are connected to the same internet network. Those are all great options. The one thing I really do want to highlight, though, is what happens if you need to share a video. So let's say, for example, you have a YouTube video that you want to insert into your PowerPoint, and you're trying to do it to change it up in the middle of that session so people will pay attention. Maybe you sprinkled in polling, breakout rooms, different ways to keep people engaged, and now you've got a video. What you would want to do is hit the new share button, which I'll demo in a minute, and check off these two options here at the bottom to share computer sound and optimize for a full screen video. Hugely important here because that prioritizes screen share over anything for video. So the video itself won't be choppy, audio will match up. Zoom just kind of changes how screen share functions. Once you're done with that video clip being screen shared, make sure you hit new share and come back and uncheck these options and share that PowerPoint again so that it goes back to prioritizing it for static content. Now, what I mean by that, so the new share option here, I'm going to share my whole desktop here. So hopefully you all can see, I know it looks a little funky, but you see this, basically this page here, this little toolbar. I'm not clicking the stop share option. I'm clicking new share and picking between anything I already have open. So for example, let's say I wanted to pull up this webinars page. I can hit new share again, and it now opens up that Google browser. What if I pull up this second one here? New share, it pulls up an extra one. So anything that you have not minimized, that is an option for you to be able to share. And in general, I'm using a demo functionality here. In general, people will not see you click new share and switch your application. So they'll not see that, they won't see that middle part of you choosing a new application or selecting the those options for using a video clip. I think I saw one other question get put either in the Q&A or the chat on how do we share maybe just audio or just an MP3. It's a great question. In the advanced options, so we started on basic. If you go to advanced, there's sharing computer sound only. Great use case for this. One of my colleagues does this. He'll play the Jeopardy theme song before his training starts or some random other music. He's not sharing any content. He just shares just computer sound and plays it from an MP3, his Spotify, Apple Music, anything like that. Now, the other big piece. I know we're in webinar format, so none of you as attendees can help me out with the annotation side of things here. So fellow panelists, if you wouldn't mind helping me out, because I might be the worst artist in recorded history. When you're the person sharing content, annotate is on this main menu for you. It's really easy to find. If you are someone that's consuming shared content, so let's say you're a student, you want your students to annotate on a whiteboard or annotate on top of maybe a worksheet that you created in Microsoft Word, and you want them to just annotate on top of that with fill in the blank answers, annotate's great. For those of you, my fellow panelists that see this right now, if you look at the top of your screen, you should see a little view options drop down, and annotate should be on that menu. So as you can hopefully see here, I can draw a very disproportionate and terrible stick figure at the bottom left. I can type text in here. I can cover things up, draw an arrow. I can use stamps. I can use the arrow tool like Todd is doing. But one of my favorites is the spotlight tool. Now, hopefully you all are seeing this in my screenshots here on my slide deck. The spotlight tool is actually for the person sharing the content. So for example, if I stopped sharing content and Todd started to, he would have access to the spotlight tool. Now, the reason I bring this one up, instead of just drawing everywhere, so this is me at the bottom, no matter how many times I click in red down here, I can't progress slides. I don't really have any control over my mouse, right? Ideally, if you're presenting, you want that control, and that's where Spotlight comes into play. Hopefully you all can see this. I've been using it all day today, but the red dot at the tip of my mouse, I can click through slides like I just did, and I have full mouse control. The other piece here that I do want to highlight before I move on to recording in breakout rooms is the clear and save options. So if I draw all over the screen, I can hit the clear button, which is what I did. I cleared everybody's drawings. And if I really liked everything on the screen, so use case I mentioned earlier, you've got a worksheet that you created in a PDF or in Microsoft Word, Excel for your students to take a look at and annotate on top of, you can hit the save button. And that saves it as a screenshot. So it doesn't save natively on the spreadsheet that you're sharing, but it saves it as a screenshot so that you can see exactly what people were answering when you were sharing that. For those of you that do have the ability to record, that's this record button at the bottom. If you remember in the beginning, I talked about the basic or free version. You can locally record to your computer with the free version, but in order to get cloud recording, you do need the paid version of Zoom. Alrighty, home stretch, and then we'll just cover some questions. Speaking of the free version, I've seen this question in the chat and the Q&A a little bit, is, you know, when does the 40-minute timer start? What happens for one-to-one meetings? So if you're a basic license holder, the free version, if you have a one-on-one meeting, there's no time limit. Well, 24 hours, but I would hope that you wouldn't have a meeting that lasts consistently for that long at any point. If it's a group meeting, the 40-minute timer starts once that third person joins that meeting. Now, breakout rooms. This is available for everybody. So free version, paid version, breakout rooms can be used, which is why it's one of my favorites. To enable this functionality, you'll want to go to Zoom's web portal here. In the web portal here, you've got the ability to go to your in-meeting advanced settings. So if you all remember where I was at in the beginning with host and participant video, join before host, you're just going to scroll down a little further till you find breakout rooms. Once you enable the breakout room feature, that allows you to split people up into up to 50 different breakout rooms. You can do it automatically, or you can do it manually. Before you go create these rooms, though, I would recommend looking at the settings. So in a meeting, you'll see the breakout rooms option on your toolbar. When you click that, this window opens. You see the options menu here. Things like moving participants to breakout rooms automatically. I always recommend that. A countdown timer when you close a breakout room. I saw a question that was posed earlier in the Q&A. Within breakout rooms, can people still annotate, share content, be on whiteboards? Absolutely. think of breakout rooms like their own sub-Zoom meeting. The best example I always go with is from my childhood. When I was in elementary school, my teacher used to love to break us out into groups of 4 or 5 people. And instead of sending us out to the playground or random different spots around the classroom so that we had complete autonomy, she would just put us in different corners of the classroom. That way, she could go walk around the classroom, listen in on each group really easily, and then stand at the front of the room and just project her voice to say, hey, everyone, we're coming back in 5 minutes. Think about breakout rooms with Zoom the same way. Now, when I'm creating these rooms, I hit the breakout rooms button at the bottom right, and it will ask me to assign the number of participants into the number of rooms. You can decide how many rooms you want, and it'll tell you how many participants based on your overall number. If you automatically create those, it just spreads people out automatically. If you manually create them, you have to assign people to rooms individually. So on the manual side, if I hit create breakout rooms, I have to go in and I have to potentially rename the room if I want, delete it, or assign people to it. If I'd like to assign people manually, I click the assign button for each room. I check off the boxes of who I'd like to put in each one. As you can see, it breaks them out, and I just hit open all rooms. Now, one other thing you can do, let's say you manually create these rooms and you just want to switch Heather and Liz or Art and Kaylin. You just hit the move to a different breakout room, or you can exchange them with somebody else to switch them and which room that they're in. Once you have opened all these rooms, you see who is in these rooms by the green icon, and I can close all those rooms at one time. Host and co-host can move between breakout rooms. So if I wanted to go in and join breakout 1 and Todd was my co-host and he wants to be in number 2, we both can easily join each of those individually, and host and co-host can move around between each of those rooms. If I'm in that room, I can just hit leave the room and it takes me back to the main session. One of the last pieces here is the broadcast option. So you remember the example I used a minute ago of my teacher used to stand at the front of the room and just kind of speak louder than normal and say, hey, we'll be done in 5 minutes. That can be done with this broadcast feature, but it's just via text. So let's say I type in a message and I hit broadcast, it'll go out to every single one of those rooms and kind of a banner at the top to let them know my message that I want to share. Now, when I hit this close all rooms, it's giving me that countdown timer. That gives all of those users the ability to screenshot anything that they need to. If they were doing a whiteboarding session and you're asking them to present when they come back, they're going to need to take that screenshot so they can share you what they've all worked on together. Now, if you ever do want to recreate any of these, you can just go to the recreate button and recreate all rooms. What a lot of people will do is, let's say you want to run breakout rooms 3 times in an hour-long meeting, and you want to just scramble everybody each time. You create the rooms the first time and create them automatically. Then you hit recreate, and it reshuffles everybody all around. That way, you don't have to manually do that. I've seen a question in here about certain different functionalities on breakout rooms, content share, and can people move in and out of breakout rooms on their own. So as I mentioned, any content can be shared with breakout rooms. So you can share content, you can share a whiteboard, none of that's restricted at all. Users cannot move between breakout rooms on their own. That's actually something that we are in development for. So ideally, I think later this year, that feature will probably be rolled out so that you as the host can let people change their breakout rooms on the fly if they want without you having to manually reshuffle them. Last thing here, I know we're almost at time and I want to make sure we get to some of these questions that we have in here that maybe I didn't fully cover. The mobile app. So a lot of people that I've been seeing from an education standpoint like to use our mobile app for both Apple and Android devices. This can be done on an iPhone, an Android, or on a tablet. A question I'm predicting that's in the Q&A right now, or that I will get, is, can I use a stylus or an Apple Pencil? Can I annotate on a whiteboard from my tablet? 100%. I've seen a lot of educators actually like to run their meetings from a large tablet because they're able to better annotate on a whiteboard with that maybe than they would be in general. On the mobile app, just to give you a quick overview of what this looks like, you'll just want to sign in and you'll have all those same options as the desktop app we talked about, just a little smaller in that mobile format. Last piece on this, because I know that there's a large amount of questions here. If you have questions that we did not cover today, I'm seeing a lot of them. So things about Chromebooks and about exact co-host controls in a meeting. There is a lot of resources for you here on Zoom support site, just because we won't get a chance to get to all of these questions today. I would highly recommend checking out support.zoom.us. One of my favorite pieces of it is these 1 to 3 minute video introductions. So there are videos on things like breakout rooms, recording, scheduling a meeting from Outlook. I know that was a question that was brought up from some of you today that we didn't get a chance to go over. Very similar to scheduling from Google, just using a different calendar. There's so many different added value pieces to this here. And we actually, I believe we're going to be restructuring our support page in the next week or so. And at the top will just be user quick start guide for new users to Zoom. So that would be a good thing to definitely check out in written format. Last piece for me, and then hopefully we'll get a little bit of time to answer some of these questions that didn't get covered. If you ever have to reach out to our tech support team, you definitely can. If you're a part of a group account, I would talk to your admins here. I think that would be a good step to start with if you're part of a kind of a group or university or school account. They might have a better practice for how to get some support on your end, but I would always recommend checking out our support page. It's got a lot of valuable information, because I do know that today was a lot of information that I shared in the last 45 minutes or so. You know, there's always things that, you know, people might have picked up maybe half of what I said, or hopefully a little more. I would always recommend kind of checking out some of these added pieces for sure.
Great. Thank you, Tyler. And we're going to try to get a few questions in. And I just want to remind people, based on what you just said, if you missed something, we will be sending out a recording of this meeting. So I just want to clarify a couple of things. Breakout rooms are available in the meeting accounts, not in the webinar accounts. Are they available for the free accounts?
Yep. The breakout rooms functionality, it will probably not be turned on by default for the free accounts, but it is definitely available for sure.
And so you just have to go into the settings and turn it on, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct, yeah. And thank you all in the chat. There's so many of you saying thankful for the session. Great presentation. I really appreciate that. I know it's difficult to keep people engaged for 45 plus minutes. So hopefully I did a good enough job keeping you all engaged a little bit. My biggest recommendation, I know we're going to grab a couple of these questions, is mess around with Zoom with some of your colleagues or counterparts, or even your family. I use my parents as guinea pigs sometimes if I'm wanting to test some things from a functionality standpoint. Kick your friends out. You know, have your husband, wife join a Zoom meeting that you're hosting prior to maybe hosting something live, and, you know, pass off host controls to them, screen share, and have them show you, hey, here's how it looks for me. That's a huge recommendation. That's actually how I learned Zoom, is I started just messing around with it on my end.
There's some good questions here about like taking the screenshots. If you're annotating or doing the whiteboard and you take a screenshot, where does that get saved? And can you share that image with like a follow-up meeting? How do you bring up that?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Okay, so let me go ahead and I'm going to screen share my entire screen here. Again, it's going to look a little funky. You're seeing, you know, all this here on the right. But let's say that I'm annotating here and I wanted to draw the stick figure. Windows and Mac, it's going to function a little bit differently, just so everybody knows. But I'm coming in here and let's say I hit this save button. For me on Mac, it shows it to me in Finder, which basically I've got this little pop-up here. It gives me the date and time and the title. So distance learning here is the title and the meeting ID. So if I just want to open up that screenshot, you can see it right here. I've got it, and I can save that. I can drag it to my desktop. I don't remember what the exact verbiage is on a Windows device, but it should do the same kind of thing where if I do this save, it'll tell me that it's going to be in a specific folder, and I can just find that.
And I know on ours, it's typically in our user folders, like
Yeah.
the video or the documents folder, things like that, or picture folder. So I would encourage people to look there first. My other colleagues, let's see if they've collected any questions while I'm scrolling through.
Tyler, this is Robin. Can you do a quick rundown of what the features are that are included with the free account and versus the paid account? We had a lot of questions about that.
Yeah. Okay, so paid account versus free account features. Let me see if I have a document that might help that instead. Give me 1 second. I thought we had a feature comparison. I might have to chase that one down for us, but in general, the basics are for a basic user, 40-minute time limit if it's a group meeting. If it's a one-on-one, is the 24 hours would be the length. No cloud recording for those basic users, and no polling. But a lot of the major functionalities are there. So co-host, breakout rooms, local recording, being able to leave a meeting and pass off host control. There's so many different things of that. I would say the biggest features to highlight that are not available is the recording piece. And no phone only meetings. So let's say you're just dialing in from PSTN from your cell phone with a number. If it's a basic meeting, that one's a little bit more restricted as well. Yeah, those are kind of the big ones. I know some people are talking about that 40-minute time limit. Looks like it might have been lifted. In certain areas it was. So with K through 12s, those are definitely an important piece that got lifted. I know we're technically over time, but I'm seeing a couple good questions in the chat that I think would be valuable. People are asking about scheduling. So what happens if I schedule a meeting for 10 a.m. and I start it at 9:30, or it goes to 11:30? It's going way past what we normally set it up for. No problem there at all. Absolutely no problem. That one is a great functionality. We just kind of need you to schedule a time for our back-end system. So if I start a meeting earlier than I planned, or it runs way later, no problem. If I delete one occurrence in a recurring series, no problem at all. If I move one of those times in a recurring series, same thing, no problem at all. The only time you would face issues is if you actually deleted the whole series, which deletes the entire Zoom meeting at that point. So being flexible with those meetings, absolutely no problem. You are never restricted to just the time limit that you set it up for.
And Tyler, the one caveat to that is if you are scheduling, like you said before, if you are scheduling like back-to-back meetings and you're using your personal ID for both of those, it then matters if you run over, because new people at the end of the hour, new people might be signing in that are expecting to attend your next meeting, and they'll be coming in on the wrap up of your current meeting.
Yep, exactly. Let's see, trying to see if there's a couple other ones that I can see in the Q&A here that I did not
we
answer.
had one question just in general, like what are the benefits of using the web browser to schedule things and access Zoom versus the app that you download onto your desktop? Any kind of thoughts about that?
Yeah. So there's a couple of different pieces to that. I always recommend going through your calendar just because it's a couple less clicks. However, if you're someone that's going to be pretty traditionally setting up polling questions, I would go through the web portal. You would just need to hit the button that says add to Google or Outlook calendar after you schedule that meeting to be able to send out the invite. So for me, it's more about what you're scheduling and how more than anything. Yeah.
Okay.
And then one other thing here, I do have to hop off in a couple minutes, but people asked in the chat, I'm still not 100% clear on the whiteboard feature, how that works. So this specifically is the whiteboard functionality. So let's say you wanted to do this from scratch, and I want to type in text, what is 5 times 6, and I want to put it equals here. Anybody that is a participant in that meeting, again, we're in webinar, so all of you as attendees can't annotate with us right now, but if we were in a meeting, any one of your students would be able to do so. As you can see, we've got someone putting that answer in via writing it down. They could type it in via text. You know, there's plenty of options. You can hit a check mark next to it if that person was correct. One of my other favorites too, if I hit the more button, I can actually show the names of annotators. It's a functionality on the main menu here. So Todd, anybody that's a panelist, if you want to go ahead and start writing on the whiteboard, should see that person's name start to pop up when they are annotating on that screen. You see Todd's name there. He's writing down 6 times 5 on his end. I know he's writing it. And then if somebody answered that question that was different, I would see that person's name too. So if you're actually trying to track that, might not be a bad functionality to potentially be aware of. And to show all you where that's at, you would hit the more button on your controls and you would hit show names of annotators.
And Tyler, automatically, like my pencil was in blue, if one of the other people was also doing annotation, would they have a different color?
You can choose your color. So if you see that format option here, I can choose my color, the width, the size of my font, all of these different options.
Okay.
Yeah, and someone put an awesome question in the chat. What if I want only myself as the host or the teacher to be able to annotate? All you need to do is go to this more button and hit disable attendee annotation. That means the host is the only person that is able to then annotate in that session.
All right. Tyler, and I think that probably butts up against your next presentation. So thank you so much for helping us out here and showing folks how to use Zoom. I think it's a tool that a lot of folks are using. And again, just to remind people, we will be getting out the recording on Monday, along with some responses to questions that Tyler didn't get to and things like that. So thank you all for coming, and look early next week for your invitation for next Friday's webinar.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. Appreciate you all for having me, and have a good rest of your week and weekend.
Thank you, Tyler. And thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.